Right, hi, Graham Healy from Rise Up Australia, Brisbane 2025. Well, we see the headlines as now Sydney has its anti-terror squad, fully armed, bulletproof vests, long arms, perhaps machine guns, rifles, what have you. The question I ask, is it going to be the headquarters of this rapid response going to be in the centre of Lakemba, where the issue, and they entitled it, religious something or other, they've said. The reality is this is Islamic problems we have in this country, as you have all around the world. And suddenly we've got what we call a reactive response. This is the problem. I mean, apart from the Albanese government, we've got to get rid of anyhow, but this is a problem in Australia. It's reactive, not preventative. 2 years of Free Palestine marches by the paid idiots who were following it, basically, but the leaders of it were terrorists, basically. Of course, one of the terrorists seen on the Sydney Harbour Bridge flying the Hamas flags and all these other terrorist flags. Now, that should be a no-brainer to be immediately illegal in Australia. But for 2 years that went on. For 2 years, marching around with the photograph of the Ayatollah Khomeini or the Ayatollah, whatever the current one is. Basically, that's a death cult. They've killed 36,000 of their own people in Iran. That's the Islamic regime. And regarding Pauline Hanson's commentary, there are no good Muslims. Look, they're good, bad, and the ugly, and all races, of course. Pauline should have framed that a little bit differently, but of course they take one snippet of a half a sentence, and that's what they run with to try and frame her as a racist, which is totally incorrect. The reality is, what we should be focused on, including all the politicians, is Islam. Islam's got 150 verses of jihad in their Quran. So that basically says, one, death to infidels, death to Jews, and death to Christians, and death to everyone else that isn't in these, the Islamic death cults. So the problem is Islam. It's not the individual Muslim. If a person is a moderate Muslim, according to the president of Turkey, who is probably the authority regarding the Muslim faith apart from the Ayatollahs, and I might add that Turkey cooperated with Hitler in the genocide of the Jews. Think about that for a little while. Nothing much has changed in Turkey's politics regarding Islam and terrorism. So we're dealing with the big elephant sitting in the room that none of these politicians, except for Pauline Hanson, is even voicing it. Okay, the so-called opposition we've got here in Australia have sort of raved on about the ISIS brides. That's fair enough. But you had 2.5 years to stand up and be counted, and you said nothing until it became a political football. So what you've got to look at with the politicians is, my friend David Pallow said, you've got to look at what they've said over time. Have they stood up over time against the particular issues? The Islamification of Australia, the hate speech against the Jews for 2.5 years, death to the IDF, global infidata. Have they arrested, what's her name, Grace Tame, for inciting violence or mass murder by quoting global infidata? This is, you got no excuse for being stupid. And it is illegal to incite violence according to the Attorney General's office when you read the law in Australia regarding peaceful protest. See, none of this was peaceful protest, the Sydney protest, none of it whatsoever. It was just a proxy for the terrorist organisation called Hamas, who rule Gaza. And these paid idiots quote genocide of Gaza or something. Well, they're quoting figures given to them by terrorists. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. And the ISIS brides thing, at the end of the day, Albanese's government should be charged for treason. They've lied through their teeth. They facilitated these people with Australian passports, and then played this silly public game about they're not responsible for anything, including issuing passports, says the Immigration Minister, Tony Burka. So you've got a real problem in this government. It's not just about the Islam problem. Diversity is our strength, remember. So diversity apparently has murdered 15 people at Bondi Beach, 15 Australians in cold blood. To me, we've got to do a bit more than talk about it. We've got to have action on the Western Front. So the action on the Western Front means that all these hate preachers, Islamic hate preachers, let's call them for what they are, they're the ones quoting the 150 verses of jihad out of the Quran, and they're acting off it, actually. They're the front line, and they're the front line all around the world. It's just a no-brainer. Regarding Gaza, none of the Islamic nations around, the province of Palestine, which is really not a country at all, just a terrorism headquarters funded by Iran, none of the Islamic countries around there would take any of them. You notice that? Egypt's right next door. Zero. Zip. They'd shoot them from the top of the wall. Why? Because they're all radicalised over in Gaza. They're all radicalised terrorists. That is the headquarters of the terrorism, and it's been the focal point from the Ayatollahs in Iran, which, by the way, as we've said many times, or I've said many times, where's the protests on the 36,000 young people that have been murdered by the Islamic regime? Where's their protests? We've got some peaceful protests happening by the Iranian people who actually want the prince back and the dynasty back in Iran, rather than this oppressive, death cult running the show since 1979, last 45 years or so. So that's over. Trump will act very shortly, and I believe it'll be a very intense, brief war, and it might go on for about 3 months, I believe, and it'll change the geopolitical structures regarding terrorism. Unfortunately, when that happens, these Ayatollahs, even though they run like rabbits, they want to kill everyone, and then as soon as anything happens to them, they're running like a rabbit over to Russia or something, or down the tunnel or whatever they're doing. It's all right for them to order to murder people, but when the righteous anger is reversed back of them, they run like scared rabbits. That's for certain. So what's going to happen there? Of course, these terrorists who run Iran, they've already notified their sleeper cells. I'll tell you that now. I know it. There's plenty of them in Australia, because even though our security forces, ASIO, do a great job, but they're sort of hobbled in this respect, that they only can be reactive and not proactive. It's ridiculous. We must change the laws in Australia so that our security forces can be proactive. In other words, if they locate and find terrorist cells, they can act and deport, act and imprison. Now, I think, as I've said in a few of these blogs, what we need to do is create a detention centre basically over in Christmas Island, where we deport these hate preachers and all the rest of them that have had a lot of public footage lately. They're all on the record, for goodness sake. If you haven't breached the hate speech laws by celebrating 1,200 Jews being murdered publicly in the streets of Sydney, well, it's just BS, isn't it? So they've got to be prosecuted. You've got to remove any of these characters off the public space that incite violence. It's called incitement. It's clear cut in the law. And this other character, this Caucasian character, that red-headed Caucasian character, that is the organiser of these Free Palestine movement in Sydney, that seems to appear in court every second on human rights or something. He should be arrested. He should be arrested for inciting violence. Anyone who's quoted the, global infodata terms, or death of the IDF, or death gas the Jews, and all this, which has been said on TV. So anyone who said that, they're on CCTV, they should be arrested for inciting violence, because that's what they've done. 2.5 years we've copped this across the Brisbane Bridge here. We tried to, we've stood up against that, our particular group, with our associates. And, in Sydney it was just terrible to see our icons, Bondi Beach and Sydney Harbour desecrated with this Islamic crap. So we've just got to stand up and push up against it. And at the end of the day, remember this: Israel is our number one ally in the Middle East. Without Israel, you'll have Australia turned into an Islamic caliphate in 10 seconds, I'm telling you. Just have a look at what's happening in the UK, especially. So the spirit of the light horse is rising up, and it's rising up against what I see is the spirit of Hitler rising up in Australia. Can you believe it? In the Bondi massacre, some survivors of the Holocaust, in their 80s or whatever, killed, shot down in cold blood. That is not on. Not on. So the average Australian, who basically has got the Anzac spirit, I believe, must push back legally, peacefully, through the legislation, and we've got to have some politicians that have a bit of guts and gumption. And thank God that Pauline Hanson, now, as I say, I don't agree with all political people. I was a former Senate candidate myself. If I don't agree with something, with a political party or whatever, I'd run as an independent for the Senate this time, I think. I was with Rise Up Australia in 2019. And I'll just remind everyone, in 2019, we were pushing the same agenda regarding radical Islam. We knew what was going to happen, and it's happened now. But regarding Pauline Hanson's personal stance, look, 100 out of 100, Pauline, very, very good. You stood up and you basically said what the rest of Australia is really thinking. And Pauline's good at that. She just voices what the opinion of the Australian people are. But the next thing is that we have to legislate, and, especially ASIO, we've got to legislate against any of these radicals running these marches. It's not about genocide of Gaza or anything like that. That's just complete Hamas propaganda. The reality is, in that war, in the war in Gaza, 80% of the people who were killed were Hamas terrorists. 20% casualties. In any war, they're going to get civilian casualties. Mind you, these civilians, unfortunately, most of them are all radicalised, including the ISIS brides that the Albanese government is secretly bringing back. That should be a treasonous issue. Albanese government should be held for treason in that particular. They've lied to the people of Australia, and it is not on to bring back terrorists into this country. And they are terrorists. They went over there. They're the ones that were chopping heads off. And you can imagine, they've got 13-year-olds now that have been fully radicalised. Now, where are you going to put them? You're going to hold them in detention for the next 50 years? This is just insanity. We have to stand up, push back legally and peacefully. But the laws that we already have regarding peaceful assembly, and they've been completely ignored, and, as Josh Frydenberg said, have resulted in the Bondi massacre. And since then, nothing really effective has been done. Sure, we can have a police force running around with rifles and bulletproof vests, and that's great for them. That looks good. Yes, I feel secure because there's a police officer, with AK-24 or whatever weaponry they've got. That's great. But I'll tell you this, if a terrorism attack happens, that window of time between the shooters and the police arriving is exactly what happened in Sydney. Yeah, you could have that fast response mob. That's fine. But the terrorists will pick a time and a place where they get maximum casualty rate with no one knowing what's going on in the middle of something public. You can imagine the New Year celebration and one of these terrorists throws a bomb in or something like that. You imagine that. So this is what we've got to fight back against in Australia, and it's a very serious matter. And the root cause of it is Islam, unfortunately. I'm not talking about any independent Muslim or something like that. There's good and bad and ugly and not. But remember that the president of Turkey, who's the head Muslim speaker for the world, said there's no such thing as a moderate Muslim. Now, what they mean is this. If you are a Muslim, you adhere to what's written in the Quran. What's written in the Quran? 150 verses of jihad, if you're not in the death cult. Unfortunately, it's a problem. Unfortunately, we have to deal with it in Australia. And you know what? I think it's going to get worse before we act accordingly. Unfortunately, I just got that feeling the terrorism attacks in Australia are not over. We've already had a car ramming the gates of the Jewish synagogue here in Brisbane. Man, that's not on. We've really got to come down hard and heavy and even use our military to purge out radical Islam out of this country. And any citizen that remains in this country observes the rule of law, and the rule of law has got to be applied, of course, which it isn't at the moment, and the Constitution. Then we have to have a referendum on free speech, and I believe the area we're going down is a total double dissolution. We've got to get rid of Albanese's government. They're rotten to the core. That's Graham Healy, the Truth blog, and the Truth with prophetic and political content. Have a great day. Remember, we are fighting a spiritual war, actually. We're fighting against the forces of evil. And the God that the Islamic Caliphate serves definitely isn't the Christian God. I'll tell you that now. It is the devil himself, because who in their right mind would celebrate the death of 1,200 people? Do you think that's the same God that they serve in the Christian church? No, it isn't. It's the exact opposite. So by their fruit, you will know who they are, whatever they claim to be, what they claim by name. You will see what and how they act physically and morally. And the question to ask any person that belongs to the Islamic faith is, do you believe in Sharia law? That's the litmus test. And if they say yes, well, just read what the Sharia law talks about. You know, that's the old beheadings, the chopping off of arms and limbs, and women are only 50% worth. So, that's Graham Healy over and out. We'll speak to you soon. Have a great day.